So instead of a show of hands, could we have a show of cell phones? I love it. That means almost everyone has it in their hand already. So can you put it on airplane mode? These presentations are recorded and they're on YouTube. And I guess the last time we did this, last month, a couple of cell phones went off. And that interfered a little with the sound. So when Erik lowered the lights just now, it reminded me that years ago, when I lived in Seattle, I had this one room that was like a mansion, a really big room, and the light was on a rheostat. So I had a big party one night, and at about 9:30 p.m., somebody leaned against the rheostat, and the lights went up and down 3 times. And everybody jumped up and put on their coat and left. I was like, no, no. But it was too late. Okay, I have a couple of announcements. My name is Lynn Nino. I never remember to tell you that, so I actually wrote it down. Not my name, but the clue. The second thing is there are bathrooms downstairs, apparently 2 downstairs and 1 back through this door. Okay, we are asking a $3 donation, not from the presenters, but from everybody else. And this is how we pay the rent and pay our tech, Erik. And a couple of months ago, they said, we might have to raise the amount. So we're trying really hard to keep it at $3. So they've given us a little reprieve. So that's a reminder. And our first speaker tonight is Miles Styer. Miles has lived in Santa Fe, San Francisco, Seattle, Phoenix, Atlanta, Athens, Georgia, New York City, Chicago, and now Tacoma. He's an artist, art promoter, gardener, writer, son, widower, friend, boyfriend, nature lover, and a work in progress. He's still trying to figure things out. Locally, Miles is on the Arts and Heritage Advisory Council for Metro Parks and is a volunteer for the Point Defiance Herb Garden. For work, he helps clean energy companies and artists to promote themselves. His clients include the Proctor Art Gallery here in Tacoma, Solar Cowboys in Sacramento, that's Cowboys with a Z, the Westchester Center for Jazz and Contemporary Music, bassist, I hope that's how you say that word, Reverend Charles Moyer, comedian Luke Severeid, New World and Jazz Radio Promotions, jeweler Joni Wakims, she's a local jeweler, painter B. Bleach, and many more. He's pleased to share with you this evening some thoughts he has about promoting and sharing creative endeavors. Miles?
Good evening, everybody. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to be anywhere, but especially here with you tonight on Salish land, currently occupied by Tacoma, to talk about promoting and selling art. Now, I think part of why I was asked to come here was because I've spent a lot of time professionally in the last few years helping artists and creatives sell and promote themselves. So at the beginning of this, I'm just going to talk about art as just a commercial endeavor. But I'm an artist, I was raised by artists, and I know that art is more than that. So when I share my own art, it's going to be more about, expressive endeavors. Because you'll see that I really don't take my own advice when it comes to my own art, but that's all right. I'll be honest, this is going to be kind of all over the place. We're going to talk about art. At the end, we're going to be talking about vampires. We're going to start with this image. What does this have to do with selling art? Not much. It's just cute, so that's why I've put it up. And it's much cuter than this next slide. There we go. So I also have a business background in addition to being an artist. I have a master's in business administration from NYU. And this is a very typical business way of looking at the sales cycle. Is anybody familiar with this? Show of hands? A little bit? Okay. I'm going to take this off. Excuse me. It's the sales and marketing funnel. And it's basically how most people think about the customer journey of trying to buy something. And at the top, it's where most people are, and it's just about building awareness of who you are, what your product or service is. It's where a lot of branding takes place. There's a subset of those people who are going to actually show some genuine interest in what you're doing, what you're providing. And they're going to try to learn more information about it and try to learn the benefits and whether it meets a need. A subsection of those people are going to actually make logistical decisions about whether to buy something. They're going to look at price. They're going to compare it to other pieces. They're going to figure out how to take it home, how to take care of it, all those kinds of questions. And then a subset of that, they're going to actually make the decision. Now, this kind of approach is used for all different things, whether you are trying to sell $1 million yacht or something more simple. Like this. Does anybody know what this is? It's a potato, yeah. Most people are pretty aware of what a potato is. They know what it tastes like, they know what colors they like, what sizes, how to prepare it, and so the experience of buying a potato is actually kind of simple. You go to the grocery store or to the farmer's market, you look at the different types, you choose the ones you want, you look at the prices, and then you can walk out the door. And that's pretty simple, pretty quick. You can buy a potato in like 5 minutes. With art, there's a different kind of journey. It's not as simple as a potato. This was my potato harvest from last year. I just wanted to share it. Yeah. I love potatoes. So let's talk about art. Here are 2 pieces by 2 clients of mine. I chose them because I really like bright, colorful pieces, and both of these pieces have those qualities. On the left, Marilyn, she really focuses on Afrocentric design, and on the right, B really focuses on abstraction. Now, the journey of trying to buy a piece of art is a lot more complicated than a potato, because most artists don't really have the awareness built into their art and their work. People have to learn about the art and learn about them, and that takes a lot of work. Most people don't know, most people do know what a potato is. I bet most of you haven't seen these artists before. So when you're considering art, potatoes are kind of somewhat interchangeable, but art isn't. And so the process of learning about art and each piece is really involved and takes a long time. And then trying to figure out what price is fair is kind of an impossible situation for most artists. Most artists kind of just wing it or look at other artists. So the journey is a lot more complex. I wanted to show the different things that I have done with one of my clients to kind of help people go through that sales funnel with art. And so this client that I'm going to focus on as kind of a case is Proctor Art Gallery, which is, down the street. And they've got a brick and mortar location, and theoretically, the experience of buying a piece of art could be like a potato. Someone walks by, they see a piece in the window, they're struck with it, they have to have it now, they're in, they buy it, they leave. That is theoretically possible. But more likely, the journey is going to be much more circuitous, and it's going to take a lot longer. Someone is going to walk by the gallery, maybe they've never seen it before, then they walk by it 20 more times over the course of 2 months, then they finally go in, Then they take a look at the art. Then they visit the website maybe a month later. Then they look at us on social media. Then they come in and see a piece they like and, say they're going to buy it, and then at the last minute pull out, and then go home and have a really big argument with their partner, and then, it's really upset, and then like a week later, they apologize and come back together, and then one of them comes back and buys the piece on layaway, and then comes back several months later and finally pays it out, and then the transaction is made. And unlike a potato, which could take 5 minutes, that whole process could take a year. And so I think it's hard to be an artist because we're kind of measuring our own successes by how many, potato experiences we have. We want people to walk by the art, see it, be struck with it, know exactly what it is, what value it has. They don't care about the price, they just want it right now, and then they sell. Like, we think of that as success. Of course, that's awesome. But, success also looks like planting seeds and nurturing relationships with people over the course of a long time. And it could take a year and many different interactions to sell a unique piece of art. So the role of a marketer, a salesperson, is to create all these different kinds of engagements that help people go through that funnel and all these circuitous paths. So for Proctor Art Gallery, we have a bunch of different tactics that we use to get people down the funnel. One is just the brick and mortar store. We've got display windows, signage, all that kind of stuff. You can walk in, never knowing about the gallery, then you learn about the art, then you fall in love with the art, then you can buy the art. That's one path. But we also have a lot of other pathways that people can go down. We've got a website that we update every single month. We take down photos of pieces that have sold. We put up new stuff. We hold events and make sure that we promote the events on here. We promote the featured artists or guest artists that come into the gallery. We're always keeping that up to date because people do come to the website, look at a piece, call us, and buy it. It does happen. We also have a regular email newsletter that we send out. It's a very visual focus. It's not really sales focused. It's just getting pretty images in front of people's eyes so that they think about Proctor Art Gallery, think about art, and want to come in and see everything. We also have different forms of social media, like many people do. This is our Facebook page. We also have an Instagram page, and we post regularly about events and artists and all kinds of stuff to, again, help people flow through that funnel. And it has really worked. I started working with Proctor Art Gallery in early 2018, and at that time when we were starting the email newsletter, we had 100 email subscribers, and now we've got 764, which is not huge, but every single month we're getting our art in front of 764 eyes, and that does make a difference. People do come in, maybe they expect to, or maybe they just pass by and then walk on in. But it does nudge people to come in. Also, our website, the most early data that I have for this is in March 2020, we had 757 page views, and in February of 2023, we had 1,380. Again, not a huge amount compared to like really large businesses, but a steady improvement over time with really consistent coordinated marketing practices. And that has been very successful for the gallery. But the gallery is an organization, and it's not just one person. When you're just one person, one artist trying to sell and promote your work, it's a lot harder because all this stuff I'm talking about is like a second job to a certain extent. So how do you do that for yourself in a way you're not going to overwhelm yourself or use all your time doing marketing instead of creating? One technique is to use the same content across many different platforms. So you're not reinventing everything every time you switch from one to the other. One person who does this really well is one of the artists at the website, John Bradham, who's a plein air painter, and something that he creates are these YouTube videos of him doing the work. A lot of artists do this. They do the videos of them doing the work, and people like watching it. But it's nice because you're not having to create something necessarily completely new. You're just videotaping yourself doing what you want to be doing, which I think saves some time. People also do this a lot on social media. This is another one of a local artist, Kathy Anderson, and she's really good at doing reels and also using her intellectual property, her art, on lots of different types of products. Some of them are original prints, and some of them are, prints on towels or smaller things. She takes her intellectual property and she uses it to make a lot of different products. And that's very successful. So that's two ways that artists, when they're just individuals, can still take advantage of these different marketing practices without exhausting themselves. Let's see, who's next? One of my favorite artists, have any of you heard of Mike Bennett before? Okay, he's an artist out of Portland, and he's an illustrator. He does these kind of cartoonish, really funny-looking figures, and he creates these full immersive experiences that people can go and see them. So here's me. I'm in one of these immersive experiences where you can walk through and engage with these huge cutouts of different figures and scenes. And it's great because it appeals to a broad range of ages. There are plenty of adults going, and there are plenty of kids going. So it's a really welcoming, interesting environment. And you can see, this is kind of the above view of it. You get this whole experience, and you pay to go in and see it. And then at the end, there's a gift shop, naturally, exit through the gift shop. But what's really effective about that is if you return to this funnel, most of the time when you're talking about where are you making the money, it's at the bottom, right? When someone actually buys something. But with this immersive experience that he does, he's getting money from people in the top portions, the people who are interested or know about his work but are not committed to buying an original piece of art. So I think it's just a really exceptional way of guiding people through the funnel and getting something out of it at each level. I think it's really effective. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about my life. I am an artist. I was raised by artists. This is my mother. She's a collage artist. She's here tonight. This is just a page on the Proctor Gallery website because she's also a member. And my father is also works in music. And this is an older project, but it's one of my favorite. He built a MIDI-controlled instrument that he called the chopper tone and did a series of performances that are very cool. So I'm really invested in the art scene, and I'm always creative. And I don't typically think of myself as an artist, but maybe just someone with too many hobbies. Maybe you can identify with that. Here's one of my pieces. I call it Bless This Mess. It's a dollhouse that I've turned into a kind of dilapidated hoarder's house. This is in the presentation. This was at a show at Tacoma Community College, which is a really great art space that I don't think enough artists really reach out to. They do have a juried show coming up, and I've got the form with me. So if you're interested in submitting anything to Tacoma Community College, the gallery, let me know, and I'll give it to you. Here's just the front door. So yeah, that was one of my pieces. I really like pieces that have depth, you can immerse yourself in. And so a year ago, I started doing this technique with photographs to create more depth, deep experiences. So for example, this is a picture of my great-grandparents. Gaga and Doc. And for Christmas, I made my mom a piece of acrylic or epoxy art. And so here's the finished thing. I'll show it here. And basically, I took the image and ripped it up into several layers. And then I printed them onto transparency and then painted the back in white and then put them between layers of epoxy. And so when you look at it, it gives a three-dimensional view of the original piece, and it's really wonderful. So that's one of my pieces, and I did the same thing for this one. Now, let me get the name for it. This is called A Man Looking Through a Window by Samuel Van Hoogstraten. Excuse me. And I did not know about the artist particularly, but I love the image. It has that kind of trompe-l'oeil quality and has lots of different depths. I found it in one of my favorite art books that I just treasured and looked through all through my childhood. And my mother, who's a collage artist, has ripped it all to hell, but it's still, a wonderful resource. And it still provides lots of inspiration to me. Here is my version. You can't really see it well on the screen. So, oops, excuse me, I'm sorry. I also brought it here, and I'll put it on the side to take a look, but it's really interesting to see through the various layers and have a three-dimensional experience. My main creative pursuits, though, is really in the garden, and it's where I find the most peace and put a lot of my energy. This is the backyard, and it features that flower, one of my favorite flowers, which is called the Majorette Double Champagne, which is a great name for a hollyhock. And I'm really interested in the ways that you can take gardening and make them artistic in a way, finding architectural ways of using plants. So I love making walls of sunflowers or walls of tomatoes. This was last year. I tried to make a tomato arch, like a passageway, and I got about halfway there. I have to work on it. Last year, I also got an allotment at a community garden, and that was a wonderful kind of creative place for me to put my energy, and it was really peaceful, and I learned a lot, like about how to make roses or grow roses, and really enjoyed taking photographs of everything. This is a beautiful zinnia and a big marigold. And one of my big pet projects was a berry patch, which has lots of blueberries, but also wild huckleberries that I'm trying to cultivate, and lots of other interesting kinds of berries. And I just enjoy taking photographs throughout the year of what happens, not just as a record for me, but just as beautiful moments. This is a bonsai that I recently made. I've been working on it for a couple of years now and just potted it in. And I feel like that's another opportunity for me to express myself through gardening. Here's all my onions. So there's another layer of benefit from this. It's not just beautiful or architectural. I'm also making food for my friends and family. This year I'm focusing on tulips and other kinds of bulbs. So in the fall, I planted this big bed of tulips I'm really excited about, except I didn't really think about the shape, and it actually kind of looks like a grave, which is unintended, but I'm going to work on it. I also work with the herb garden. On the right is Pamela Phelps, who owns Proctor Art Gallery, and so I got help from a lot of the artists and other community members to participate. Here's one view of it when I first started, right before COVID. And this was this past year, and it definitely has filled in and looks a lot better. but there's a lot of work. So if any of you are interested, we're actually having a planting party on April 15th. So if you are a gardener, come see me. Here is a crocus that is just blooming this week. This is kind of the time for crocuses. And snowdrops. But my favorite are these plants, and they're called Kiss Me Over the Garden Gates. Just such a sweet name. They're a little bit difficult to grow, but once you grow them, they get huge, 11, 12 feet up, and absolutely beautiful. And a few years ago, I decided to do a little research about where these came from. And they came from a French botanist who traveled around the Ottoman Empire in 1700 looking for plants. And he's a typical misogynist, racist, European imperialist, but a great botanist, and found all these great plants, and he left a record of all his experiences traveling through the Ottoman Empire. And over the last few years, I've just gotten more and more interested in finding out what else happened on that journey. So I have been translating that book into English, and that's kind of my primary creative project right now. So he found the plant at the base of Mount Ararat, which is the traditional place where Noah's Ark landed, in a monastery. And the thing is that on this journey, he doesn't actually talk about plants that much, I'm finding out. He talks about all different sorts of things. So I wanted to share some excerpts of the translation with you, just to kind of give you a sense of what I've been working on. This is from chapter 2. He is traveling through the island of Crete, which is part of the Ottoman Empire at the time. And Crete is that historic place with the Minotaur and the labyrinth. And in this section, he actually visits a labyrinth that is inside a mountain. On July 1st, after having some wax torches made at the archpriest's house, we left to go see the labyrinth. This famous place is a subterranean conduit in the manner of a path, one that by 1,000 detours, taken in all directions, randomly, and without any regularity, runs through the interior of a hill at the foot of Mount Ida on the southern side, 3 miles from the ruins of Gortys. One enters this labyrinth through a natural opening, 7 or 8 steps wide, so low that a man of medium build could hardly pass through without stooping. The bottom of the entrance is very crooked, but the top is fairly level and supported by several rock beds placed horizontally on top of one another. A type of cavern, very rustic, whose slope is soft, presents itself first, marks nothing unusual. But in measure, as one advances, the place appeared completely surprising, nothing but detours, and a main alley less cluttered than the others, conducting a path about 1,200 steps up to the bottom of the labyrinth, which contains 2 large and beautiful rooms where tourists can repose with pleasure. Although this alley forks at its extremity, it's not there that's dangerous. It's rather at the entrance, almost 30 steps from the first-hand cavern. If one takes on another road, after having made some progress down the path, one gets lost in an infinity of recesses and dead ends, from where one wouldn't know how to escape without risk of losing oneself. Thus, our guides followed this main alley without detouring. We made 11,060 not well-counted steps. It is 7 or 8 feet tall, paneled with bed of rocks, horizontal, and completely level. We very much wanted to return safely. Our first care was to post one of our guards at the entrance to the cavern with the order to go fetch everyone in the next village to come free us if we did not return before night. Each of us was carrying in hand a big lit torch. In all detours difficult to find, we attached on the right paper. One of our Greek guides was leaving on the left some small bundles of pine needles, and another was spreading on the path some straw, for which he had a full bag under his arm. In this manner, we arrived without pain at the center of the labyrinth, where the great alley forks and ends in 2 rooms, around 2 meters long, almost round, cut into the rock. One sees there several writings made with charcoal, for example, P. Francesco, Maria Pesaro Cappuccino, Frater Thaddeus Nicolaus, all next to the date 1534. farther, 1444. Elsewhere, one reads Como Cap de la Fonteria, 1526. One finds several other marks in this alley, 1495, 1516, 1560, 1579, 1699. We wrote also 1700 in 3 places with the black stone. And through the magic of Google, you can actually see this place, which you can't visit anymore because it was used in the Second World War by the Nazis as a weapon storage. And when they were leaving, they blew it up. So interesting to see it. I think my time is out. Is that right? Yeah. So I just wanted to say thank you. I do have another section about vampires, but you can all read about it in the published book eventually. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate your attention.
Miles,
Yes.
there might be questions.
Okay.
Any questions?
Hear about the vampires.
I'll read a quick section. How about that? The man whose story we will give was a peasant from Mykonos, ill-tempered and quarrelsome by nature. It is noteworthy to discuss in such subjects. He was killed in the countryside. They don't know by whom or how. 2 days after they had interred him in the town chapel, gossip spread that someone saw him walking in long strides at night and that he was coming into homes, overturning furniture, extinguishing lamps, groping people on the backside, and pulling 1,000 little mischievous pranks. We only laughed about it at first, but the affair became serious when the more respectable people began to complain. I'll skip this. On the 10th day, the body was unburied after the Mass, and they put themselves to the task of ripping out his heart. The village butcher, who was a fairly old and very clumsy man, began by opening up the stomach instead of the breast. He rummaged for a long time through the entrails without finding what he was looking for. Finally, someone suggested that he should pierce the diaphragm. The heart was ripped out with admiration from all those present. I'll stop there. Any other questions? Yes.
What language are you translating?
French? Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Again, I really appreciate it.
Before I forget, can anybody use these 2 bags of commercial paper mache? Nobody? So next up is Anna Thurston. Born in Colorado, she has always been immersed in nature. After attending 13 schools before college, Anna passed up and nearly passed out the opportunity to illustrate human anatomy. In the horticulture department at Colorado State University, her leaf rolled over in a program cultivating her art interests with her intuitive understanding of native plant and horticulture. From CSU, she gained a Bachelor of Science degree in landscape horticulture and design. In 2017, she later earned Masters of Environmental Studies degree from Evergreen State College. Anna has taught classes and designed gardens since the early 1980s. For 18 years, she has also served 2 major municipalities as a water conservation specialist. It'd be fun to try to say that fast 3 times. After leaving utility life, Anna rescued native plants from development bulldozers for the sake of endangered salmon. Her plant geek is now housed under the banner of Advanced Botanical Resources. Her designer of outdoor rooms for birds, wildlife, pollinators, and people works under the banner of Sacred Nature Designs. These are all businesses she owns. And her facilitator of nonprofit organizations and volunteers flies under the banner of Quercus Collaborative. Tonight, Anna will be revisiting her yoga teacher training through the lens of art collage while considering the 8 limbs of Ayurvedic yoga, and she'll tell you what that is. By assembling intuitively selective images, Anna has experienced a way to develop her internal feedback. Intrinsic to Anna's sharing tonight is a question for your consideration. In the era of pandemonium, how do we self-regulate? Anna?
I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you tonight. I feel like I've got to the mic. Is that better? I feel like a new member of the family here. So thank you for this opportunity. First off, let's see if I can figure out how to use this. A little bit more about who I am. That's me in the middle, in the foreground. As a child, probably maybe 3 years old, in a place where I became mostly aware of nature. The Ponderosa Pine Forest outside of Denver was the place, and the birds were my buddies. Dad was very interested in my being an illustrator and introduced me to Audubon early. Along the way, did I miss one? There's one. I did do a lot of botanical illustrations and other illustrations as well involving nature, looking at bugs and painting watercolors and things like that. But decided that the landscape was where it was at for me. I have done a fair number of murals and landscapes all over Colorado, some here. Been involved in teaching, also restoration ecology. So that's a little bit. But something like the invocation that was offered to honor the Native Americans where we are meeting here tonight, I want to introduce you to Sina Frost. She is the developer of the Soul Collage program. It's trademarked, and it offers a meditative learning process that has been taken up by facilitators around the world. She studied at Yale Divinity, raised 4 kids, received a master's degree in psychology from Santa Clara University. She worked over 30 years with psychotherapy as her mainstay. She referenced a lot of healing modalities. Among them, she was most influenced by Carl Jung. She knew that the Soul Collage program was a pretty good thing, and so she actually trademarked it. And there's a whole catalog of things that you can do now around Soul Collage. You get little kits and things like that. But you can go anywhere to play it, and it's kind of fun.
Anna?
Yes,
It's a little bit hard to hear you, so
let me try that. Is that better?
yes.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. I'm sorry. Okay, so one of the things underpinning the collage program is that it's not legal to sell what we make. Part of that is because we're using artwork from other people. We're collecting these images from different places, and if I can get the button to go, you'll see that there's also a pattern to how people can connect with their cards. The image on the right shows the layout that you can coordinate your images with. You can relate to a witness image in your own cards, or you can create things that relate to external things, your community, the committee. I tend to just make cards. And part of that is just because I'm having so much fun. But I want to recognize Dale Golden and Diane Frothingham, who have led a number of community art collage programs over many years. I've been doing this for about 15 years. And it's been that valuable for me that I even got into doing a facilitator's training so that I might facilitate it for other people. I haven't done that, but I have done some yoga work because that master's degree that was mentioned helped me gain a lot of weight. And so I had to get back into the yoga thing, and part of the reading for the yoga training was the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And that's his translation of the Sanskrit language, and it's a course in how to live your life, basically. That's what the Ayurvedic traveling path is about. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the 8 limbs of yoga, Ashtanga or Ayurvedic yoga, we're going to just skim over the top of that. But these are they here. We look at things called the yamas, the niyamas, asanas, which is the yoga, the pranayama, your breath, dhyana, and samadhi, joy. Ashtanga literally means 8 limbs. Ashta and limbs, tanga. And I was educated along the way that our local octopods help us remember the fact that it can work in unison. The octopods use all 8 of their limbs, but they have a central brain. They also have about 40,000 different sensory units in every one of their arms. Those are not tentacles, they're arms. I learned that anyway. And so the idea here is that one can go through the different arms or the limbs of yoga and improve their life. And for me, this has been a real benefit towards health, towards well-being. I did lose that weight. Ha. And my first step was looking at the yamas. How am I living? They help me relate to external events, to external people, the do's and the don'ts. How do I do unto others as I might want them to do unto me? And they also address things like nonviolence, truthfulness, the non-stealing, God consciousness. Aparigraha is one of the last, non-coveting. This was one of the images that I pulled together from a number of different sources, noticing the violence happening in the Middle East, but it was happening at the same time that the tsunami was breaking loose in Sri Lanka area. These images can come together and mean a couple of different things. This one, you can see that I'm using, obviously, a comic book image of the big green Hulk, because he really captured the essence of violence that I kind of grew up with. And I wanted to process that, and I was able to do that. I love being able to make things that are full of depth and that capture things that mean something to me. I can see nonviolence in a different way as well, though. And this is it here when I look at the joy that can come from just dancing. And for me, this reverberates with nonviolence for me and joy in its own way. Satya, not lying, is something that I try to look at, but this is a different way of looking at it. is metaphor in the form of dance. A lie? I don't know. It's really up to each viewer. We ask that people don't try to interpret the cards unless it's for themselves. But for each of the people doing the collage, it's a self-discovery. So we do the art, we play together, and we experience the things that come out of the cards. Here's a different way that I look at Satya. How do I not lie about what's happening with the environment? It's an uneven world. How about non-stealing? This one, none of these really have words other than the juxtaposition of the concept, the Ayurvedic concepts that we're looking at in the 8 limbs with my experience. It took me a long time to pull these together, but it was interesting to coordinate the imagery with the concepts. Here's another way of looking at non-stealing for me that addresses the incursion of colonial Americans into Native American territory. My whole career is dependent upon native plants, and so I'm aware of how I tread on that space. Brahmacharya, how can we intelligently contact the world via our senses? I got the image of the sailor there from a high school sculpture, and she's out there in her boat, and that kind of feels like my life sometimes, is sailing around, and who knows which sail is going to catch the wind on this. But looking at it from a different way, Brahmacharya could mean this. How are we able to connect with nature when it's looking us right in the eye? I have hummingbirds that come talk to me sometimes, and they really look me in the eye, especially if I have the hose running. They'll take a little bath. It's really a treat. Aparigraha is the last yama that addresses not coveting or wanting. It's a gift that I keep experiencing, and when I put this card together, all she had in her basket was a little fish, and she was giving it away. She's the happiest little clam I think I've ever seen. But I've also noticed that having come through a place of coveting and wanting in my own family, I'm still working it. But this is one way that I can do that. The niyamas are the next of the 8 limbs, and they tell us to look internally, but they have us do these things in different ways. Are we taking walks? Do we meditate? Am I consistently taking care of my body? Do I offer thanks? And am I accountable to myself? And nobody really else is really in the game, except for whether or not I can be accountable to me so that I can ultimately be accountable to other people. Other elements of the niyamas addressing self-purification through sauka, contentment through santosha, the tapas, self-discipline, we'll see a little bit of these, svadhyaya, self-study, isvara pranidhana, and the surrender that comes with activating oneself. Of the first of these self-purification is sauka. I found these interesting hands, one being an AI and the other being an East Indian, what do we call that, tattoo. And because I was still very involved in water, I wanted to relate to that. We're moving into the AI world, but we're all still very attached to a lot of the details of our history and our pasts. How else might I purify? Do I give myself the time to take that long, hot soak that I deserve? How about contentment? I find it also in the garden, so thank you for sharing that with your garden experience. And can I find contentment even though things are not always going well? Like if I'm losing it. This is I went through a spell where I kind of lost my memory because my health was off kilter. And I think that was a big motivator for me to get into this. I've since regained my memory, and but with that, I've been able to find a different way of contentment. Tapas, self-discipline. Can we work the self-discipline that comes with the expenditure of time, maybe even money, and effort? Definitely a lot of that. And certainly giving myself to yoga has become less of an effort, really, for me than it is more a giving of my time. But boy, I'm sure glad I can delay the gratification that comes with the expenditure of that time. Svadhyaya, the self-study. I'm always looking at plants, but I'm always trying to relate that to the world around me and how I can invest others in preserving what is so incredible to me. I'd love to do that with anybody. And sometimes I just got to go out and spend time alone to find that space. One of the things I really like about this program is how readily my images tend to line up. I'm always astounded at how that works. These pictures just land on my table, and they come together with astonishing ease. And then sometimes I don't really understand them until maybe a month later or a year later. And that's part of the joy of doing this. As far as pranadhana is my devotion to release itself. And I do that mostly with dance, but my endeavor is to find balance. I do a lot of work out in the swampy areas for restoration and ecology for birds, and but that is my art. And I lost this card somewhere. I don't know where it is, but I still have the image, and I'm glad for that because I can still reference it in this way. One last image relative to devotion and release is this one. And this was a difficult image for me to relate to because it helps me deal with the climate change scenario. You can see a little person in the upper left-hand corner on one of those floating pieces. That gives you a notion of the scale of this picture. Behind the backdrop of the Sumi painter. And to me that was like, oh, well, there's God, you know. Maybe if I look at this just differently, I can come away with a different notion and release it. And it did help me a great deal to do that. Yoga postures or asanas are the next of the limbs. And that's usually where people sit an awful lot, but it's also a place for doing motion and other things. The movement is the stimulant for your lymph. It doesn't have to be really gung-ho to be beneficial, but it's crucial to all of the other 7 limbs, just like the 8 limbs of the octopod working together. I see also as the simplest of postures as one of the most beneficial. How can I hold the mountain form and see myself in that shape there? This came together after about 2 or 3 iterations of tearing cards apart and reassembling them and finding leaves and things like that. The breath work of the 8 limbs is also important. How can I influence my own life force and through the discussion process share what I know, but it's really about oxygenating my brain and my body. But I do take it in terms of how do I relate to people. Pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses, is looking at the self from a distance. You may remember that first layout of cards, which is kind of like doing tarot, which is kind of what soul collage could be. You know, you talk to your cards, you commune with them, things like that. Really, the idea that I have come to work out the most with this program is to witness myself. Step aside, see how it is that my emotions might be working a little over time or something like that, or not working at all, and be able to regulate the choices that I have for response based on that. How can I engage in that process of just connecting with the universe and feeling it with every sense that I have possible? It requires that I close my eyes and just take a deep breath. Or listen. Listen for the music. Sometimes just doing the art is part of it. Dharana, concentration, definitely. The collage process takes a lot of concentration, but when we're working together, co-playing, it's rather sublime because everybody's coming up with really cool images. Okay? It's also a place where I get to dream out loud, in a way. This was one of my first images, and I pulled some 3D things out of it. I had fun with that one. Okay, seventh limb, we're moving into meditation. And that doesn't mean that we're going to sit around and about this. It might be just doing some artwork, or for me, it is doing the garden outside. It is otherwise a tough concept for me to relate to because my mind is like a pack of puppies. Bring it back, bring that puppy brain back. But the idea is to keep bringing the puppy back into the awareness, really. The more we do that, the more the brain does get trained, and the calmer it does become over time. Doing the art is a bit of that meditation for me. This is actually a charcoal, pencil charcoal drawing. It looks like a photograph to me, and I'm sorry, I had to borrow it. But this is another example of why we don't sell our work. We can't. It's against the rule. Diana comes at us from meditating in other ways too, and I meditate through movement. Okay? Samadhi, the thing that tends to come through the final process. I looked like that little girl on the bottom right as a child. I looked a lot like that, actually. And but I remember also picking peas from the garden and playing with cocoons and just enjoying being outside. How can we set aside all of the things that might distract us and look for the joy, the experience of life? The samadhi, it might be cold out, but can we find that joy that's out in the world? That's my story. I'm going to stick to the fact. Thank you for coming. Are there any questions that I might answer? I do have, by the way, my notebook of images, or copies of images, with my note-taking about each one, if you're interested. I see.
Are there any books that you would recommend reading on that?
Actually, yes, there is. Sina Frost has published quite a few books, and I don't have the titles off the top of my head, but if you were to Google soul collage, you would get tons of information. You would also get lots of images that other people have created. So it's quite a big bank of creativity, and it does bring people well together. It's a very functional tool. Yeah. Any other questions? Thanks again.
Thank you. April 21st is the next tripod. They're on third Fridays of the month. And that one will feature Shannon Eakins and Mark Dombrowski. And they have made a record of her swimming in the Duwamish River and not dying. So that should be very interesting. And then Mario Lorenz, who I think you all know, is doing a show on local street fairs, and he's worked for years with Hilltop, which may or may not have a street fair this year because the new light rail goes right down Martin Luther King, and they don't know where to have it if they can't have it there. And then Sean Foote, who has been organizing 100th Monkey parties in Tacoma for the last 5 years, is going to do a presentation. So that should be really interesting, April 21st. So our last speaker tonight, Irina Rasputnis, grew up in Russia and moved to Kentucky with her family as a child. Kentucky didn't quite work out for her, and on a whim, she relocated to Boston, where she got a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering, an almost master's degree in urban planning, and a healthy dose of exposure to an expressive experimental performance art scene and anti-capitalist beliefs, the latter of which shaped her. Irina now lives in Tacoma with her husband, 2 children, and 1 cat. By day, she works for the City of Seattle on topics of electrification, decarbonization, and workforce development. Outside of work, she founded and leads the Tacoma-Rama Community Street Band, organized Central Tacoma Porch Fest last August, and has lots more community building arts projects in various stages of ideation. Irina?
Thank you. Okay, let's see. How's the mic? Am I close enough? I'm short. Is this better? Okay. So I like to tell people that I grew up in the Great Depression. But this is me in the Soviet Union in the 80s. I grew up in the Soviet Union in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg, and I can tell you there was just a lot of structure and discipline in my childhood. This is first day of school. We wore white bows in our hair for the girls. The white bows went away after the first day of school, but we did have to sit like that every day. And then we went to school many days a week, I think 6 days a week. So I did have a bicycle. Oh, actually, let's see, that's my dad. There's my bicycle, which is the thing that gave me some freedom, and I zoomed around my neighborhood. My mom was the main breadwinner in the family, and my dad worked a lot of odd jobs. I need to get used to this controller. Here he is as an extra in a film. And I just threw that photograph in because I thought it was funny. So after this, like the next decade of my life is fairly uneventful. And I guess I should have said, I think my general talk is maybe similar to Miles's, where he kind of shared the components of what goes into like a marketing and promotion strategy. These are like the components that influenced my life and got me involved in the projects that I'm involved in. And maybe it mirrors Anna's talk as well, because I had to do a lot of introspection to kind of weave this story together. So the next decade of my life is fairly uneventful. My family emigrated to America. We landed in Kentucky, from Leningrad to Kentucky. It was a bit of a culture shock. I was not a fan. I really struggled. In my teenage years of angst, I discovered French existentialists and the theater of the absurd. I got really into theater, started working with the local theater community, but none of them were doing these French existentialist plays that I really wanted to do. So I found some actors who were willing and a bar owner who was willing, and I started a production company, and I started putting on these plays written by old grumpy Frenchmen. And what I learned there is really like if you ask nicely, people will just come out and do things, and there's a lot you can do if you just start asking around. So again, just moving, after high school, I didn't really see much opportunity for myself in Kentucky, and so I got back on my bike. There you go, which again gave me freedom. And on a whim, I chose to move to Boston. I rode my bike from Kentucky to Boston as a teenager. It was adventurous, probably made some really dumb decisions along the way. Now that I have kids, I have a different opinion on it. But I've made a lot of decisions like this on a whim, and I've never regretted them. So, good way to make big decisions. When I landed in Boston, coming off of a month-long bike trip, I got involved with the bicycle community, and Bikes Not Bombs is an organization in Boston that was founded literally to send bicycles to Nicaragua in the 80s when our government was sending bombs there. So the name Bikes Not Bombs is the mission. It's an organization that was created to oppose the military-industrial complex and support the Sandinistas in Nicaragua with a practical transportation tool, which is the bicycle. And so Bikes Not Bombs was involved in international development work, still is, and does a lot of youth development work as well. And actually, Second Cycle here in Tacoma was modeled on the youth development component of Bikes Not Bombs. So what we did there is we got donations of bikes that were otherwise intended for the landfill. We sorted them, loaded them into containers, packed the containers really full, and shipped them to partners in what we called the Global South. So here's a container unloading in Rwanda. And so we really were able to fit a lot of bikes on those containers. I was really inspired by not only the initial mission of Bikes Not Bombs in the 80s, but also how that mission continued to play out into what now was, the late 90s, the early aughts. And I got really close to a lot of folks at Bikes Not Bombs. There was a really big, it's a grassroots nonprofit. You make do with what you can. You use things up. You wear things out. And there's always another use for anything you can think of. And just keeping things out of the landfill, the environmental implications, the materialistic implications of that really inspired me. One of the folks I became really close with at Bikes Not Bombs is this guy, Erik, who was kind of the office manager there. He decided one day that he really wanted to learn how to play the trumpet. And I happened to have no big deal, but I played the clarinet in 6th grade band. And so he asked me if I would help him learn the trumpet. And he went around and he asked, anyone he could think of who had any experience with a musical instrument. And so for probably 6 months worth of Saturdays, we would get together in Erik's basement and play the most fun songs that we could think of for a trumpet, which were circus fanfares. And word started getting around that there was this circus band that practiced in the basement So we started getting invited to perform at community festivals. And here we are, you know, you can tell, maybe just by looking, the skill level here. A lot of us learning instruments for the first time, some of us not quite clear on how to hold them, and a captive audience. And so this, for a while, was just called the Circus Band, and eventually was called the Stick and Rag Village Orchestra. And the folks in the Stick and Rag Village Orchestra are all the kinds of folks that you would expect to be involved in an organization like Bikes Not Bombs. We've got anti-capitalists, socialists, anarchists, people who lived in collectives and co-ops, and that was really also very formative for me. However, in the meanwhile, I was living this double life. I was earning a chemical engineering degree at a program that was a very traditional chemical engineering program, which means very focused on petroleum engineering. And all of my classmates were looking forward to careers in the oil industry, which I started kind of thinking maybe I should have done more research when I was picking my major in my school. And I was really struggling to reconcile the two. And as I graduated and I started working for nonprofits, for startups that were employing a lot of buzzwords like nanotech and clean tech, and realizing that, you know, back then, there really wasn't that much work happening at the nanoscale, and clean tech is kind of a, you know, just a marketing term. I was just kind of having this internal struggle. So I got back on my bike. Let's see, there we go. And I quit my job. I stashed all my stuff in various basements all over Boston. And I rode my bike to Wisconsin. And the reason I went to Wisconsin is because I had some friends in Wisconsin, and I thought it might be fun to visit them. It's kind of the main decision point there. And so I rode across, I think, what people call Middle America, and I met a lot of people who really were poor and had very little, had nothing, but were so generous and so interested in my story. And, you know, my parents were very not interested in this path that I had chosen. And I realized that even though the people I met wouldn't define them this way, they were very collectively minded and very community minded. And they had systems in place to share resources and to help each other and to help strangers who were biking across the country completely by choice. And so I was really inspired by that. And, you know, I spent another maybe couple months biking and visiting friends and meeting people until I started running out of money and realized I needed to head back home. And unbeknownst to me, I came home just a couple days before Honkfest. So Honkfest, this is 2006. Honkfest is a festival of activist street bands founded in Boston. This is the inaugural Honkfest. The language that they use, I took this off their website, it's an irresistible spectacle of creative expression. And my band was playing in Honkfest. So as soon as I got home, I had to figure out which basement my clarinet was in and where my silly pants were. And I went around and found those things and showed up to a quick last-minute practice, and then Honk happened. So this is Honk. This is Davis Square in Somerville, where I lived, and there were a lot of bands with a lot of members, a lot of big horns, big sound, and all of these people were actual musicians. They all had talent and skill and training. And here's my little band, the Stick and Rag Village Orchestra. We were a little different than everyone else, because we had clarinets and violins and a melodica. And so you really had to get real close to us to hear us. And also the music we played wasn't big, loud, thumpy music. And so I realized, kind of in looking at the other bands, that I was in the band that I wanted to be in. All those bands were so cool, so hot, but we had formed a community and we had learned and grown together. And so that was a big inspiration. Even though we were sloppy, that was kind of our charm. And so after Honk Fest and after like getting exposed to all these other bands from all over the country, and some bands from around the world as well, we were like, we're a real band now. So we got a bus that could legally carry 4 passengers, and we went on a 2-week bus tour. This is a bus that's powered by vegetable grease. So we spent a lot of time negotiating with restaurants that had deep, fryers to get their fry oil. They were all very skeptical, but they have to pay to dispose of it, and we were taking it for free, so eventually it worked out. Our bus eventually broke down, so the next year when it was time to go on tour, we went on a bike tour. And so we rode from Boston down the Rhode Island coast and then up the coast to the tip of Cape Cod, and we took the ferry back to Boston from Provincetown. Our tuba player, in this process, figuring out, equipment and trailers, learned that he had the heaviest tuba ever made. So that's okay. On our bike tour every day, we had 2 main objectives. We needed to busk enough to raise money to feed ourselves, and we needed to go swimming. And sometimes on days where we had to cover more mileage, we would combine the 2. And that was fun. It turns out that if you go to a state park and you're a band and you're busking on the beach, people don't really bring money to state park, but they'll have a couple 20s for an emergency. So busking at little lakes at the state park is very fruitful. So eventually this band broke up because people moved away, and we just it became too much. People wanted to do other things with their time. There was some, interpersonal turmoil that happens over time, and we're all very young and didn't really quite know how to deal with that. And various other bands formed, and so the band, here's our group picture from the bike tour. I think this is when we came back. This is our welcome back homecoming show. We took a group picture. So when this band broke up, I needed to fill that void in my life. So I started a band that was called the Russian Ensemble. It was a band it was kind of a pretend band. We played 8 songs, which were songs that I remembered from my childhood. They were all very easy songs. And so we really only needed to practice enough to kind of learn them. And then if there was a gig, we would get together for a quick practice before the gig, but it wasn't a huge time commitment. So that was my living room is where we're playing, and now you're looking at my dining room, which is where, this is the days of before COVID, where you would pack as many people into your house as you could when you threw a party. But we would do these kind of living room shows in various living rooms. I think this is a benefit for an interpreters collective. And then I joined other bands. So here's a flyer. I love show flyers. But this flyer features 3 bands that I was in. The Russian Ensemble, which is my fake Russian band. The Factory Seconds, which is another honk-style band that my friends formed. And Skora Smertnica is a Balkan party band. Skora Smertnica is a brand of cheap wine, and it also means quick death in many Slavic languages. So let's see, the next decade of my life, there's more transition. I kind of had to focus on figuring out what I was going to do now that I didn't want to do chemical engineering. I went to graduate school, got into a new career in the public sector, in energy policy, got married, I had kids, moved to Tacoma. And as I got settled down in Tacoma, I got that itch to start playing music. And so here's my kids. My first plan, because I didn't really know anyone here, was I had a really active Buy Nothing group in my neighborhood. So I decided I was going to form the Buy Nothing community band. And I posted this on Facebook, and you see there's like 12 comments. A lot of people were excited about it. No one showed up. I tried this like 3 times. No one showed up. So I was like, okay, not going to happen in the Buy Nothing group. So I posted on Craigslist, which is where I met Brendan, who's here. So Brendan is like member number 3, I think, of this new band that I was forming. It was initially called the Tacomrades because I thought that was funny, but then like I decided it wasn't that funny, and so we had to change the name, and we went through some steps. We're now called Tacomarama, and here's some flyers. We are recruiting always. You can pass these around. Share them with your friends. The trick is you don't have to be any good. And so, the band kind of started, and then, a few people here and there. Eventually it grew a little bit. Here is us playing at our first paying gig. We played at the May Day event that Puget Sound Revels organized. So we're like 9 or 10 people there. Let's see, I think, as we kind of got into year 2 or 3 of COVID, parties came back. So I've got a video here of us playing at a party that Steve and Natalie hosted last year. You really want to join this band. The band, and some of you, we typically practice on Fridays, and so a lot of the band is here. Thank you guys for coming. They moved their practice to Wright Park and shortened it a little bit so they could come, so some of you might have heard them. The band's really been growing. Here we are at the Grit City Costume Paddle. They gave us a costume stipend, so we had to show up. Let's see. And then I guess the question that always comes up from people whenever we have gigs is like, what do we wear? What's the attire? So I always tell people, just dress like you're there to have fun, and it always works out. This is Shell and Teresa. Shell's here in the band. And so this is kind of like a big undertaking in my life, and I'm pretty happy with how it's come together and where it is now. I think there are about 30 people in the band. We don't require any level of commitment, so there's not 30 people at any one practice. But there's enough people that there's always going to be enough. And so the next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to inspire other people to make music. And, with the sense that you don't actually have to be, at any level of skill. You just have to do the thing that you like doing, and that's generally sufficient. So I organized last year Central Tacoma Porch Fest in my neighborhood where I live in Central Tacoma. And this is, again, I went to the Buy Nothing group and I was like, ask, I need your porch. So Porch Fest is a music festival that takes place on people's porches. And so you ask people to give up their porches for an afternoon, you recruit musicians, you do some matchmaking, and, we went and flyered the whole neighborhood. And, about a week later, we had 6 porches. And we were like, all right, okay. We went and flyered again. We got a few more. We did more outreach. And they trickled in. And so this is kind of the map of the neighborhood. We ended up with 32 porches and 50 bands, all between, starting at 1, ending at 5 on an afternoon. And we had people just walking around. A lot of the bands, invited their friends, so some people just camped out in one yard. We had neighbors walking, it's okay for Porch Fest to walk into your neighbor's yard and talk to them. And it was a huge success. We had a parade, so I invited, it was our band plus some other honk bands from Seattle. We paraded people because it kind of moved from one side of the neighborhood to the other. So we kind of tried to use the parade to move people over. And it was fun. People loved being porch hosts. This is like the perfect porch host couple because they're both realtors. And so I'm definitely going to go after them for some, funding next year. For this year, Porch Fest is like an event for realtors to fund, right? This is a band, the Window Smashing Job Creators, out of Olympia. And this is their audience. This is from across the street, people just kind of hanging out, watching them play. This is the battle stations, I think, or maybe the flying Folshes. Can't remember now. But people just kind of rode bikes, to get around faster. There were people set up activities for kids. There was a cookout on one side of the neighborhood. People just kind of in addition to organizing this festival, people added so much to it. There were artisans who used the opportunity to do a yard craft fair or yard sales. There were folks, the sign says water for dogs or short people with low standards. We don't judge. So people set up water stations, and a lot of people who weren't comfortable hosting set up water stations or snack stations. And, people kind of, I feel like I live in the right neighborhood for Porch Fest. And, I don't want to claim that I did it alone. We had a team of about a dozen volunteers who helped kind of organize and then carry everything out. And and some of what we've seen on social media is just accolades. People really enjoyed it. I've been getting nonstop emails since last August about, is it happening again? Can you please make it an annual event? And so, in closing, I guess I'll just kind of tee up some of the what's next for me. One, I am right now organizing a bike tour for my band. So that's happening soon, I hope, now that the weather's getting warmer. I got a grant to do Porch Fest this year from Tacoma Venues and Events. So this year, I'm going to be using the grant funding to recruit BIPOC performers, which we struggled recruiting last year because we couldn't really promise that we were going to raise any money. And a lot of people didn't want to commit if there wasn't, a stipend. And then also, I got a grant also from Tacoma Venues and Events to organize a honk fest in Tacoma. So it won't be as big as what you saw there, It'll be, Tacoma scale. And then some of the longer term stuff I'm working on is looking for opportunities to develop cross-generational music enrichment programming that provide access to music education, instruments, and things like that, similar to what Tacoma Rama is, but with a little more focus on education. I think that's it. That's me. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah. So if you're interested in Porch Fest, the best way to find out is by following Porch Fest on social media. Tacoma Porch Fest with the little @ on Instagram and on Facebook, Tacoma Porch Fest. Eventually, we'll also be posting stuff on our website, but we're looking for a website volunteer. If anyone here is good at websites, Miles, if you know anyone. We're looking for some help. So eventually, right now we're still kind of getting ready to announce that Porch Fest will be August 5th. So put that in your calendar. For the Tacoma Day of Honk, we'll promote that through our band social media, Tacoma Rama, on Instagram and Facebook. And also, I don't know, I guess I can give you my contact info if that would help. I don't really have a newsletter, but when there's big stuff, I try to push it out.
Any more questions? I just want to salute you. That is a mammoth job you did, and I hear people raving about it all the time. And it's a lot of work.
I encourage anyone here, it is a lot of work, but it's not. Porch Fest can be done at any scale. And I would love to see Porch Fest done in other neighborhoods across Tacoma. I really feel like it needs to be spearheaded by people from the neighborhood. It needs to be kind of a community-led effort. But I'm happy to kind of share my experiences. And if you're interested in doing Porch Fest in your neighborhood, or if you live in Central Tacoma and you'd like to help me, I am recruiting volunteers. One of my goals with Porch Fest is to inspire more Porch Fests. And right now I'm working with some folks in East Tacoma who are interested in bringing Porch Fest to East Tacoma, so kind of trying to figure out how to help them get that going.
So I think most of you know Erik records these presentations, and it usually takes a couple of days for them to show up on YouTube. So you can type in Tacoma Tripod Arts, and I'll send you an email with that address. So thanks a lot for coming out tonight. Put it on your calendar, April 21. That's the next one. Thanks.